So let's talk about a team comparison. So 2 questions. First one, in the last 10 years, what organization's top defense was anchored by a defensive-minded rim runner, while its offense was led by at least one guard who drives at an elite rate and can pull up efficiently? And question 2, what was that team's best season? John, I'm going to give you one guess. One guess to rule them all.
One guess to rule them all. I'm looking for... that this organization has had a great defense in over the course of the last 10 years, or just a 1 year out of the last 10.
So they've been very good for a while. It was 1 year in particular where they really peaked as a team, and they finally hit that mark. But overall, yeah.
And they were the best defense in the league when they hit that mark. Or they were right up there.
They were right up there.
They were right up there, and they were anchored by a defensive-minded rim runner, and their offense was anchored by at least one guard that drove a ton and pulled up efficiently.
Yep, at least one guard, arguably 2, probably even more. They were dynamite offensively.
Can I have 15 seconds to try to figure this out?
Yes, you can. If you had one shot, one opportunity, sees everything you ever wanted. Did you capture it?
Or would you let it slip like I'm probably about to do?
Give it your best shot.
My gut feeling, my first instinct was to say Utah with Donovan and Rudy.
Is that your final answer?
I will say... I'm looking at the NBA standings and just looking at all these different teams. I think you could make arguments for a couple other ones, but I'll go with that.
Okay. And if you were to go with this team, is there a year that you have in mind?
What was Utah's best season? On offense or defense? I mean, no, their best. I know their best season overall was. It was the year before their last year. So 3 seasons ago.
So 2020, 21?
Sure, let's go with that.
John, you're correct.
Hey!
Nicely done.
Yeah, baby.
Very good job. So yeah,
right.
The Jazz were essentially constructed in a way where the Knicks are operating similarly. Now, if the Jazz are a blueprint, and let's face it, it wouldn't be crazy that they would be. Why? Well, they got Walt Perrin out of Utah. He's kind of running their draft. They also have Johnny Bryant, who's on the team as the associate head coach. So it stands to reason why the Knicks would take so many of the elements that Utah had as a successful organization and then try to use it as a blueprint. Does that mean use it the exact same way? No, not necessarily. There are things that are going to differ. But up here on the screen right now, I look at the EPM, estimated plus minus, another great stat that we've been talking about before. And I've sorted it by overall EPM. And at the top in this year, you've got Rudy Gobert, right? I mean, he was the best defender in the NBA that year. He was in the 99th percentile overall. Fantastic player. I typically feel that you cannot, and this came true, sure enough, you can't have your best player be a center who changes the game on defense, but is not going to do anything with you on offense. It's really tough to do that. Jokic, completely different story, right? Because he is also their point guard in so many different ways. But here they struggle. After that, you have Mike Conley. Mike Conley was in the 97th percentile. Talk about a guard who pulls up and plays defense and runs pick and roll to a fantastic level and efficient too. Although that season he was moderately efficient, but even still, that's where he kind of goes.
But that correct me if I'm wrong. That was the season. It was I think it was as an injury replacement. That was the year he made the All-Star team, right?
Yes, yeah, I believe it was. Then you have Donovan Mitchell, 94th percentile overall. He was obviously fantastic, great player.
We know about him.
We know about him. We've talked enough about him. Joe Ingles, 4th, 91st percentile overall. By the way, having 4 players in the top 10, in the 90th percentile or above overall is really good. Joe Ingles does so many things well. Then you got Niang, interestingly enough, who's now with Philly. He was in the 78th percentile. Bojan Bogdanovic, 76th percentile. Jordan Clarkson, another pull-up shooter, 67th percentile. Royce O'Neal, 61st percentile. His best defensive year, I want to say, was this year. It was the 72nd percentile. That's not good enough for your wing defender to be that level. You need more than that on the defensive end. And then Derek Favors, which was kind of always a bit of a head scratcher when he came back to Utah. So that was kind of interesting. But one other thing I wanted to point out, if you are watching this, if you go all the way to location and you see the 3-point percentage, there's a little bar on the side, and it kind of fluctuates for each player. You'll see Royce O'Neal, his bar is kind of like half full, and the other guys, they're moderately full or all the way full. That is attempt frequency. So how many attempts are you taking from three? And what's interesting about that is the Jazz, Freudian slip, have players 1 through 4 taking a whole lot of threes, and they're hitting them at a really great level. The Jazz were a phenomenal offensive 3-point shooting team, and they took a lot of these shots. And what did their fives do? Their fives did not do the shooting. The fives stayed closer to the basket. They gobbled up the offensive rebounds. So that is kind of where you see the Knicks and where it comes into play. So when we go back to the established archetypes, okay, pull-up shooting, drive, spot-up shooting, pick-and-roll ball handler, Mike Conley, Jalen Brunson. Got it. Shooting guards, grade 2 elite defender, spot-up shooter, connector. Well, we could say it's Quentin Grimes, but this would be Donovan Mitchell, right? Because he wasn't a small forward. So if we flip 2 and 3, where it's okay for the Jazz, Donovan Mitchell was their 2, and let's say RJ Barrett for their 2, or New York's 2, and then you get Royce O'Neal and Quentin Grimes at the 3, it makes a little bit more sense. You've got your high driving offensive player, 1 and 2, and then someone to protect the defense and hit these open shots at the 3. And at the 4, again, you've got someone like Randall, Bogdanovic.
I was about to say Bogdanovic, if he didn't average 20 that season, I'm gonna look it up right now because he's taken a shit ton of shots over the last few years.
Exactly. So he was a high usage player. He spotted up really well. He also actually, interestingly enough, big pull-up guy. So is that something, again, that the Knicks want to lean on with Randall, or does it just happen to be something they share in common? And maybe that's where they differ. And obviously both players were scorers. And then, of course, the centers, Mitchell Robinson, Rudy Gobert. There's a lot of connection there in terms of what they're like. So it shouldn't, and of course, the Jazz also had really efficient players for the most part. They were very good in the half court, and they didn't really turn the ball over that much, if I recall correctly. So this is kind of where you try to branch off. You got the Jazz said, we have 2 guards. We don't care really about the defense for one of them. We'd prefer, obviously, if all 5 players are great defensively, but we care about their offensive ceiling. And so we then shift the defensive burden onto the 3. And we're cool with that because then we also at the 4 have other offense going on. I think there's a question over whether the Jazz should have had someone who was better defensively than Bogdanovic. It seemed like oftentimes if Conley wasn't doing his job on defense, Mitchell definitely wasn't going to, and O'Neal was kind of pulled away. And it just kind of was a house of cards that Gobert then had to deal with. And it's funny to hear Mitchell Robinson towards the end of the season this past year saying how he can't do everything. There's got to be more defense out there. So it's an interesting parallel between these two teams. And it's something to keep note of. It's not to say the Knicks couldn't ever make a change, right? Like, let's say, again, someone like, let's say Giannis randomly becomes available next year. I don't know if he's going to. I don't know if he's going to the Knicks, but let's just hypothesize. He does not totally fit the 4 in terms of what we've constructed, right? Like, he is a high usage player and he's a scorer, but he's not really a spot up shooter. And he's definitely going to need someone at the 5 who's different than your typical rim runner because the Knicks will need better spacing in general. So it's kinetic. Does the new 5 that the Knicks look for, is it someone who can do so much of this? They can rebound on offense. They can protect the rim. They can run in the pick and roll. They can be good in the half court, but also they're really good from the outside. Like, how do you find a Brook Lopez type? Is the only player who can really do that who's not 36, 37 years old, Jaren Jackson Jr.? It's how you then add these pieces together to make them all fit is a really fascinating thing. I think there's more give and take when it comes to the front court than it is the back court. I think you need to be able to really have these pull-up threats from your backcourt, or like at least 1 and 3. but it's not something that's necessarily the priority later on at the 4-5. So it's just fascinating how all of these pieces might have to move if you get one great player, and where the Knicks are willing to sacrifice on one end, but they have to gain on the other.
A couple things. One, just to answer my own question that I raised before, Bojan only averaged 17 that year, but the previous year he had averaged 20. That dude could score. Two, more importantly, I don't know if maybe some people listening to this or watching this may not remember. Utah that season, not only were they the best team in the league by record and net rating, they ran roughshod over the NBA during this year. They had a 9.0 net rating. The next best team was the team that actually eliminated them from the playoffs, as it were. And that was the Los Angeles Clippers at 6.1. We'll get back to them in a second. But just to give you an idea of how much better than everybody else the Jazz were that year, the difference between them and the second place Clippers in net rating was it was bigger than the difference between the second place Clippers and the seventh place Nets. The Jazz had the fourth best offense in the league, and they had the third best defense in the league. They were, I would argue, more than maybe you could think of another. I'm literally trying to think of another team in the last 10, 15 years. They were the team that I think put to the test the theory that you can't win a chip, or as their season was going along, I think people were starting to ask, can they put the theory to the test of you need a top, whatever, 5, 6, 7, 8, like offensive player to win a title, because they didn't. The only player they had that made the All NBA team was Rudy Gobert, and Rudy Gobert has obviously made the All NBA team for a very specific skill set, which you just talked about. Donovan Mitchell was kind of like right on the outside looking in. Mike Conley was like a little bit low, but like they had assembled this collection of pieces that did these very specific things, as you just so eloquently pointed out and detailed. And it's an interesting thing to wonder about, because they did have a little bit of injury bad luck in the playoffs. Donovan was a little hurt. I think Mike Conley was a little hurt, if memory serves. But there's also an argument that they ran into literally the only team in the NBA that could throw something at them that on one end of the court neutralized what their greatest strength was, because they had, Utah defended well enough all year long, but they defended well enough against teams that ran traditional lineups out there. Whereas the Clippers, all they did was they ran, the whole team was these 6'6", 6'7", 6'8" wing guys. And then when you had all the switching that was necessitated, it kind of neutered Gobert's effectiveness on the defensive end. So it completely took them out of their element on defense. And yet I just looked up Utah on offense. They were the second best offensive team in the playoffs that year by offensive rating. So it's not like the Clippers shut them down. But what was the one thing everybody was saying by the end of that excruciating series, if you're a Jazz fan, the one place that they should have had where they could take advantage of the Clippers switch everything defense was Gobert. What can't Gobert do? You can't just dump the ball to Gobert and say, go score over the guy who's 6 or 7 inches shorter than you. He's not capable of doing that. And that's why I say it was like really the worst matchup for them. Between that and health, who knows? Would they have beaten the Suns? Would they have beaten the Bucks? Nobody knows. But like, they really did assemble, I think, just about the best team you could assemble within reason, without a, true blue super duper star. And it just kind of didn't work out for them. I think the last thing I'll say, and you kind of just talked about it a minute ago, it did raise some questions about maybe what is your ceiling as a team in the league today if you have a center whose skill set on offense is just very limited, which maybe we're going to get into, later in this presentation or one of the other ones you do. But I think, and Sharon, I know you've done this exercise. If you look at the teams that make it all the way or make it to the second to last round and what their centers are at least capable of doing, or at the very least, if you're a team like Boston, where like, do you have that center that really strikes fear into opponents' hearts. Well, Horford used to be, not really, but you have so many different ways you could go with the position between Horford and Robert Williams and Grant Williams, even for the time being. So they even have a kind of a pivot. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. That's a great comp. Really.
Thank you. Well, no, that was great context. I really appreciate you providing that, because I wouldn't have thought of a lot of those different things. So that's great. In terms of can you run out a traditional 5 for 48 minutes and win an NBA title? I don't think you can. I think also a lot of it has to deal with, okay, can you have a backup 4 who can run as a small ball 5? Obviously the Knicks, or even Tom Thibodeau, did not trust Obi Toppin, or has not trusted Obi Toppin enough through 3 years to be that guy. Are the Knicks going to be looking for someone like that? Or are they going to switch up their entire situation at the 5? To be discussed at a later point. But I actually want to go back really quickly because you inspired me. If you look, let's say you're following along, you're like, I don't really want to be the Jazz. I don't blame you. But also the Knicks don't want to be the Jazz either. They just want to use them as something to go off of, because so many of the principles that the Jazz incorporate are winning principles. The Jazz did not have an elite player, as you talked about, John. Their best player was Donovan Mitchell, who, I guess Rudy Gobert. But they didn't have a guard or
in the
forward.
Traditional sense.
Sure, yes.
It's your pick and roll initiator, the guy who does all the things.
Yes, 100%. But they didn't have a guard or a forward who was an all-NBA player. It just didn't happen while they were there. And if you're the Knicks, you're probably thinking, okay, what if we could build a souped-up version of the Jazz? What if we could find a true elite player to fill in ahead of the Donovan Mitchell role, ahead of the Bogdanovich role, the Gobert role, whatever it might be? But the other thing to consider here, and this is going to ring true for the rest of this presentation and moving forward, a major difference between the Jazz of 2021 and the Knicks of 2022-23. Age. We talked about before. Look at this. Gobert, that season, 29. Conley, 33. Mitchell, 24. Ingles, 33. Bogdanovich, Niang, 28. Bogdanovich, 32. Clarkson, 29. O'Neal, 28, Favors, 30. I mean, they have one player who's under the age of 26. The Knicks, their entire roster, or their entire rotation was 28 and under. So the Jazz, this was like peaks of all these players' peaks, so to speak, except for maybe Conley, were hitting at the right time. And the Knicks, so many of their players, outside of probably Randall, are still approaching their peaks. And it's great to know that Jalen Brunson probably hasn't even hit his peak yet. But that's just the kind of thing to keep in mind as you move forward and you do all these different things.
And just one real quick note. Look, the Jazz have been an impeccably run organization for a very long time now. So I want everybody to take this with a grain of salt. The Connolly trade, when they made it, which was, correct me, I know you remember this. Correct me if I'm wrong. There were ultimately 2 firsts that went out in that trade. I think it was a first that was like that season, and then I think it was a first that was 2 years later.
Grayson Allen, I think, was in that as well.
Yeah, sure. That he might have, but it was a hefty price for a guard who was very expensive. And look, the Jazz did nice to re-sign him to some manageable numbers as the years went by, but like, he was not on their timeline when they got him. And while I don't know that I would say that his decline was part of the reason that team broke up, I think that team broke up because of some internal dynamics between, Donovan and Gobert and maybe some other stuff as well. But like that was their big move. But to their credit, it was not an all-in move. And had those internal dynamics not existed, which I think was what really broke up that team, they had another move in them. Because like they have at this point like all of their own picks moving forward. I think maybe they're out one or something. Actually, no, I don't think they are. I think they have everything moving forward.
If they don't,
it's like one
their pick is their next year's pick is top 10 protected.
Okay,
there you go. 3 years.
Okay, and then so they have one second. They have essentially one pick out the door. But like they had another move if they wanted to keep that team together, and they didn't want to keep it together because those guys didn't like each other, and they were like, that's it. But like, I guess my point is, you followed up what I said with like, if you're like, well, why would the Knicks want to be the Jazz? Like, again, please don't poo-poo what the Jazz did that year.
Yeah.
They had one of the very best net rating. I'm not saying this to you. I'm saying to anybody listening.
Great.
Like the Jazz had not only the best net rating that year, they had one of the best efficiency differentials that you'll see in like the best efficiency differential this year belonged to the Boston Celtics at like plus 6.2 or 6.3. So it was way, way, way below what that Jazz team was able to accomplish. And like, who's to say if they stayed together, if they actually liked each other, another couple of years and like made that one more trade to keep the, bolster things that they couldn't have won at all. Like that team was freaking good.
It was. It's not a bad team to draw inspiration from. I'll tell you that.
If you can't get but that's the other part of it. The only reason they were going that route is because they didn't have the true blue number one. So like they were just working with what they had, much like the 2022-23 Knicks.
And think about how many of those players were homegrown, right? And they lost Gordon Hayward for nothing. Who was homegrown?
Yeah. Well, that
who played a key role in so many of those things happening? Walt Perrin. So not the worst spot to be in. But let's move on. We talked about the Knicks in terms of their role in all this, but I also wanted to rank them by EPM. Julius Randle, he was in the 93rd percentile. Mitchell Robinson, 90th. Emmanuel Quickley, 89th. Jalen Brunson, 88th. Josh Hart, 87th. Quentin Grimes, 83rd. Obi Toppin, 57th. Isaiah Hartenstein, 56th. RJ Barrett, 48th. And then Jericho Sims and Evan Fournier, who are really out for that period of, they weren't in the rotation.
And if every one of those players had played up to their EPMs in the second round against Miami, I think the Knicks might be playing a basketball game tonight.
Definitely possible. So I wanted to plot this out. Basketball Index can plot out EPM for this season only because the other stuff is behind a paywall. We have access to that, so we'll show it. But from a plotting out standpoint, it's not really there. You don't want to be within the 75th percentile on either side, right? You want to be 76th percentile and greater on offense, 76th percentile and greater on defense. So if you're in the red square, you don't want to be there. There's a big X there. Who are the players who happen to be there? Again, I didn't even limit minutes on this one. This is just to show all Knicks.
Poor Trevor Keels.
Trevor Keels is way at the bottom. I'm sorry, Trevor. It's not you. It's the way it shakes out. Although it kind of is you, to be quite honest. Jericho Sims is there.
Don't give him the "it's not you, it's me" routine. It's you.
It's you. I did not have an impact on you following there, Trevor. Jericho Sims is there. Evan Fournier had a terrible season. He's there. This is the first year that he's really been that bad. Derrick Rose, Ryan Arcidiacono. Deuce McBride's there, but the thing about Deuce is he took a huge step defensively. He was a 62nd percentile, as I mentioned, on defense. I think he was in the teens on the defensive end before that, and less solid minutes, or fewer solid minutes there. So he played 64 games last year. I still think he's going to be in what becomes a 10-man rotation, especially because I believe he's going to get extended for a small amount. I think that he can shift up past that 75th percentile mark and be totally fine. You've got Cam Reddish teetering right at the 75th percentile on defense. I think a lot of that was made up for when he was in Portland, but certainly this wasn't just capturing his time with the Knicks. You got Isaiah Hartenstein, who was the 76th percentile on defense. He's above that. He doesn't clear the offensive part, but that's okay because we know he can do it in the past. And then on the good offense, but just not cutting at defensive end, but also not good enough offensively, you have Obi Toppin and you have RJ Barrett. And right on the border there is Svi Mikhailuk. Good for Svi. He had a productive season in Charlotte. Got rattled off some wins. Yeah, rattled off some wins against the Mavericks. Wish he hadn't, to be quite honest. That pick would probably be in New York right now, but that's a different story.
I know.
And then, Jalen Brunson is, if you see the 100 cutoff, it wasn't me for some reason. Some of them have zeros. I don't know. But regardless, it's like Jalen Brunson's really, really good on offense. And Julius Randle is too. And Julius Randle graded out as a better defender by like 50 points to Jalen Brunson. It's okay. Both are great on offense. And then that top right corner, you got these are, in the 76th percentile or better on offense and on defense. It's Josh Hart, it's Quentin Grimes, it's Emmanuel Quickley, and Mitchell Robinson. For special role players. I don't mean that in an insensitive way at all. They are stars in their role, and I love them, and I'm glad they're here, and I hope they stay here, all four of them. So that's just to go to show as to where these players fall on the line. And now we're going to get a little bit more into the weeds. Because why wouldn't we, right, John?
The weeds are where the magic is made.
Yeah, stay off the weed, but stay in the weeds. That's what I think, Stephen A. Past acquisitions. Let's talk about the first year that Leon Rose and company took over. Reggie Bullock, right? Before we got to the Knicks, he had a good offensive season. It was fine. Defense wasn't great. Comes to the Knicks. When he's there, this was the, oh my God, we didn't get Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving or second star, whoever it is, season. Reggie's offense wasn't very good. 37th percentile. 71st percentile on defense, though. Had a partial guarantee. Knicks didn't want to eat the money. They said, we'll take you back, sure. And he caught fire in the second half of that season when Julius Randle said, dude, just shoot. Just keep shooting. 76th percentile on offense. 62nd percentile on defense. Not a lockdown defender. And the offense was not sustainable. So what did the Knicks do? They said, Reggie, good luck in Dallas. We don't need you. And he went to Dallas, and the offense certainly leveled off. It was 57th percentile. Defense stayed somewhat consistent, but still went down to 57th. And then this past year, actually, I don't have it pictured, but he was pretty bad. So the Knicks made the right gamble when it came to Reggie Bullock.
Yeah.
Austin Rivers, really just a shot in the dark. Hey, we need some sort of scoring off the bench, because I would imagine
good vet.
Tom Thibodeau, good vet, but I would imagine Tom Thibodeau didn't fully trust Emmanuel quickly to the point where they said, all right, well, let's add someone with the money. They got him. What's funny enough is Rivers' best defensive season by far, 75th percentile on the defensive end, was in New York, but he spent so little time on the Knicks that it probably also helped that he was on other teams where he might have done better. So Rivers was a wash, didn't do anything of consequence, after leaving the Knicks either. Which is
we'll always have Utah. That one.
Yes, that was a great game. Thank God for Utah. Elfrid Payton, right? So he comes to the Knicks in the Steve Mills year, 2018-19.
Talk about archetypes.
Season, right. Drive. Just who cares what happens when you get to the rim, but drive. First year in New York, 71st percentile on offense, 24th percentile on defense. Then the Tibbs effect, 71st percentile on offense when the Knicks bring him back. I'm sorry. No, that was before he got here. Then
no. He got brought
season,
back to be the starting point guard for the Knicks for the year season.
First season he was in New York, it was 71st percentile on offense, but on defense, he somehow was really good. At least we can say with the eye test that there are times where it was just absolute nightmare, but defensively, from an EPM standpoint, grayed out really well, 84th percentile. Then the new regime comes in. They bring him back because they said, look, we love players who drive. We love players who pull up. We love players who are efficient. You do one of those things, Elfrid. And also the market for point guards is so slim that fine, we'll bring you back on a cheap 1-year deal. Elfrid comes back. Offense, egregious, 37th percentile. Defense, crashing down, 56th percentile. 41st percentile overall. Not good. Next year, goes to Phoenix, finishes in the 1st percentile offensively. Really bad. Level at 56th again in defense, finishes in the 4th percentile EPM. I don't believe he played in the NBA this year.
No, he was not. I don't think he was on a team. I'll double check that though.
Knicks made a 1-year gamble. It did whatever. They realized they needed Derrick Rose, and that's fine. Nerlens Noel is such a funny case to me because he is, from a defensive EPM standpoint, a dream, right? We're talking straight like 90 or above. The year before he got to the Knicks, 97th percentile. Gets to the Knicks, 97th percentile. Comes back to the Knicks, 90th. Leaves the Knicks, albeit and played not a ton this past season, 95th percentile. It's the offense. 53rd percentile before he comes to the Knicks, then the 30th the year he's there, 11th the year he's there, and then last year again, 1st percentile, not with the Knicks. So the Knicks clearly made a better gamble when they got Hartenstein instead of Nerlens Noel.
He might not be on an NBA team next year.
It's possible. I mean, he could be a 3rd string center, but the offense, you can't really get that much worse than 1st percentile. It's bad. Taj Gibson comes to the Knicks, 77th percentile on offense. Then the new regime comes in and Taj doesn't have a place. So the Knicks sign him later in the season. No, never mind. It's hard. It shouldn't be that hard to figure this out because I have it color coded. The year before he was with the Knicks.
Yeah, I was about to say 21-22. He came midway through, right?
Yes. 2019-20, the first Steve Mills year. The Steve Mills Scott Perry year, 2019. Yeah. They signed Taj this 8-year. I can't speak. 2-year deal. First year's 8-year. Oh my God. 2-year
First
deal.
year's
$8 million.
Second
year was a partial guarantee of $1 million.
Partial guarantee.
That first year, right? 68th percentile on offense, 62nd percentile on defense. The Knicks don't bring him back, and then they do bring him back, and it's the 44th percentile on offense. Not good. But the Tibbs effect puts Taj at the 5, 94th percentile on defense. It's good enough to bring him back for the next year. They bring him back on the room exception. 27th percentile on offense, not good. 81st percentile on defense, very good. And then he goes to Washington and he repeats the same offense on 27th. The defense was 16th. So not great. This is another situation of the Knicks letting a player go, and that player it worked out for the Knicks to not do it. Here's a case where it didn't. Alec Burks. Before Alec Burks got there, 67th percentile offense, 50th on defense. It's okay. That's why I got a 1-year deal. Well, that year where he was in New York, the first year, 72nd and 73rd percentiles respectively. 74th and 80th percentiles respectively. Then goes to Detroit as part of the trade that helps the Knicks clear cap space. And last year, 86th percentile on offense. Yes, they could have moved Derrick Rose instead if they, I don't know if they was necessarily want to or whatever, but like it would have been better if they had substituted one for the other, but I digress. 61st percentile on defense, graded out as an 84th percentile player. So that was, in my opinion, the case where Knicks really didn't go the right way for them. It was the first time of what the players we've seen so far where it's like, I would have loved that back. It gave us Jalen Brunson, but also sticking with Derrick Rose over Alec Burks, it hurts because it feels like the Knicks could have gotten further. It's okay. They have Josh Hart to play a similar role, but not the same role because one's more of a guard and one's really considered more of a wing. But they do different things as we've talked about. And then
the Knicks would have liked to have a couple of times in these playoffs. Alec Burks. Yeah.
And then Derrick Rose, right? Year before he gets to the Knicks, 88th percentile on offense, 8th percentile on defense. Terrible. Gets acquired by the Knicks. And that season, between Detroit and New York, but mostly New York, 73rd percentile on offense, 55th percentile on defense. The next year, 69th percentile on offense, 90th percentile on defense. Incredible defensive year. And then this past season, 16th in offense, 46th percentiles for defense. So the offense has dropped precipitously, well, I guess steadily for the 3 years, and then precipitously for the last one. And the defense is just, he had that one really nice year and it's just not been great.
Yeah. And in that year, I think it was part of that DEPM was probably a function of who we got to play with and with the backups. And they were just really well-oiled machine defensively in 21-22, especially in comparison to the starters that year who were a hot mess.
Yes. Now the next year, 2021-22, Kemba Walker. So the Kemba gamble made sense on paper because you've got him coming off of a season where even though he was traded and had injury, 93rd percentile on offense, 52nd percentile on defense. Boston hit him really well. The Knicks couldn't do that. 74th percentile on offense, third percentile on defense. Gets moved to Detroit, gets bought out, plays for the Mavs with a cup of coffee with them. 59th percentile on offense, 17th percentile on defense. So Kemba was another example of, didn't really do much afterwards.
Another guy, you wonder if he's going to be on an NBA team next year.
I'd be skeptical, to be quite honest. He's a great player, at least was.
He was a great player.
Great veteran. It's just not meant to be. Evan Fournier. I mean, he was great offensively, right? I mean, talk about pull-up shooter, spot up, but he's not the defensive type. He was a better defender than he was before. Just hasn't been in New York. Season before New York, between Orlando and Boston, 90th percentile on offense. Comes to New York, you wouldn't believe it, 84th percentile on offense, but it just wasn't clicking based on how he was used and how the Knicks were using other players around him. And then this past season, he was in the 15th percentile on offense. And the defense, going back the last 3 seasons, 68th, 31st, 23rd percentile, the most recent season. So again, someone who I would imagine the Knicks move and probably rebounds, because I don't think you can get that much worse than the season Evan Fournier had. But if he's bad, then it's another team that deals with him for a year. And if he's good, then they could always find a way to bring him back.
He's an expiring contract, which I want to take back something I said last week, which is that expiring contracts don't have the value they used to, because, and credit to Simmons and Russillo, did a nice episode on the CBA for the Simmons podcast yesterday, and just kind of really, I think we've been talking about this, so we know this is coming, but for teams who are trying to just make sure that they don't skirt this second apron when these new rules come into effect a year from now, having $18 million come off your books next summer, might not be the worst thing in the world. So there's some value there. But in terms of him on the court, I really wonder what his role is going to be at his next stop. Not that, again, that's going to matter to us, but it is. I did a little bit of a statistical deep dive on him this past week, and he was not great when he was with the starters to start out the year, those first 7 games. But individually, his numbers were actually not bad. It was the team that was really struggling. That the first 5 was just atrocious. And then when he went to the bench, he was shooting 30% and 20% from 3. It was almost unfathomable how poorly he was able to transition, or not transition, as it were, to a role on the bench. So I wonder at his next stop, if he rebounds, how much of that will have to do with his role. But anyway.
Yeah, and I think he will. I think he'll be a better player. I've got Julius Randle here as well. The reason being he was extended this, in the offseason we're talking about. Julius is so fascinating because before he got to New York, 91st percentile on offense, 37th on defense. Gets to New York, dubious handles, comes out, and he's 76th percentile on offense, 56th percentile on defense. And that was a year where the Knicks just had no spacing, right? I mean, it's Elfrid Payton, Reggie Bullock, RJ Barrett, and I guess it wasn't even, was Mitch starting that year? Must have been. Julius's first year in New York?
Yes. Mitch was starting a good deal, but they also had Nerlens. They had signed Nerlens. Yep. Right? They had signed
No. You're thinking of the year before.
Who the hell was your center on that team? It was Taj.
Well, they had Taj, right?
Yeah, it was. Oh, and Bobby Portis. How could I forget?
Bobby Portis was there too. Yep.
Andrew's reminding us in the chat.
Yep.
Bobby Portis. So, how can we forget Bobby?
It was just a mess, and that's why season dipped certainly a little bit. Then 2020-21 comes around, right? And 90th percentile on offense, 85th percentile on defense. Really brought it that year, and it helped that he had an incredible shooting season. And yet the efficiency wasn't quite there, but it was nice. And then he has 2021-22, which was terrible. And yet it was still just the 62nd percentile. And I say just, both half-heartedly and earnestly, because it wasn't good. But, when you watched him, you would have thought this guy can't possibly be in the 62nd percentile, but he was. He did enough offensively that he graded out well. And the defense certainly crashed down from 85th to 64th, which not very good, especially if your offense isn't cracking it, right? He'd be an X in that box of 75 by 75 percentiles that we showed earlier. But, Knicks stuck by him, and they were rewarded with a 95th percentile season in offense, All-NBA, third team, second All-NBA team that he had been elected to or voted for, and the 56th percentile on defense, which is not great, needs to be better, but the Knicks had better team defenders around him. And then the fascinating story is Cam Reddish, who was an acquisition that season. The year, I go a little bit back into the history here, right? So his rookie season, Cam Reddish was in the 21st percentile on offense, 63rd percentile on defense, 31st percentile overall.
That was his second year.
No, his rookie year. His rookie year was 21, 63, 31. His sophomore year, his second season, was 21, 62.
Oh, 31. So it's just
in the corner
similar.
where,
okay.
Yes. And so basically, where the Knicks are looking at this, come 2021 before the deadline, they're saying, we've got a player here who's got the length, the versatility, and the promise on a defensive end. We just need him to be better on offense. If he can bring the offensive component up, then we're talking about a high floor offensive player who could be really good on the defensive end. And so they took him in. And that season, both with Atlanta and New York, he was in the 19th percentile on offense and the 31st percentile on defense. And then comes to New York, he's playing in his fourth season. The Knicks don't extend him. No surprise. They play him. He's in the rotation. They yank him out of the rotation. He's on the bench, gets traded to Portland as part of the Josh Hart trade, finishes the year 22nd offensive EPM, 75th defensive EPM. So the gamble here that the Knicks made, because people still don't fully get it, and I don't quite understand why, but at the same time, I guess I do. They saw him as a defensive wing who could spot up and hit a three, but he couldn't really do the offensive part. The defensive part was there, but also Tibbs, I would imagine, didn't feel that he played quite the way that a Tibbs basketball player should play. And it all wound up with the Knicks basically trying to trade up, where they packaged a pick and Reddish and some salary and got Josh Hart. But that's essentially the direction they were going with Cam Reddish. It was, we buy the defense. Do we buy the offense? It's a gamble, but we'll take it. And instead, the defense didn't come to play quite in the way they wanted. Got better, but didn't. And the offense just stayed stagnant, at least according to these metrics.
I think that had a lot to do with that. He needed to go to a certain situation right, in terms of how they were going to handle him. And this was not that situation.
It wasn't.
And now
this past year, their best year yet. I mean, how could you not love this? Isaiah Hartenstein, they signed him. He was coming off a season where he was in the 88th percentile on offense, 92nd on defense. That's good for 93rd percentile. It's a shame because he finished 41st percentile on offense and 76th percentile on defense. Good for 56th overall, or 56th percentile overall, I should say. But this was a departure from really who he can be. We know he can be a better player than what he was. The Achilles injuries, was missing shots and all these things. So there's room. This is almost a buy low for him. Jalen Brunson entered the offseason 91st percentile on offense, 51st on defense, good for 85th overall. And this year takes a step forward on offense, 96th percentile, takes a huge step back defensively, 7th percentile, finishes 88th percentile. You live with that. Yeah. And then finally, Josh Hart, 78th percentile on offense, 65th percentile on defense, good for 78th overall. Then the next season, he's in Portland and New York. Finished this past season, 76th percentile on the offensive end, 92nd percentile on the defensive end, good for 87th percentile overall. So what this 3-year arc has kind of told us is that the Knicks basically said, yeah, there are the things we like, and we're going to try to get gambles on these players, but we're still trying to form the identity. And as they bought time and developed their own players, they then were able to get to the point, which was the past calendar year, where they acquired objectively good to great players to be in New York, which is a far cry compared to they signed Elfrid Payton and Nerlens Noel and sign and trade for Austin Rivers all in one offseason. So they've taken huge steps here, and that's fantastic. And it's an important point to show for where they can go from here.
I mean, just say the quiet part out loud. Nobody wanted to come here. And then they got some guys that wanted to come here. Isaiah Hartenstein talked about he had other opportunities, at least one other opportunity where he could have played more and made more money. He wanted to come here because he wanted to try to win games. That's what he said. Did he fully believe it? I don't know. Did come here. He did win some games. Brunson, I mean, his story speaks for itself. And then like the fact that by the time they traded for Josh Hart was so gung-ho about coming here and being part of this. And even like, you know, it turned out to be a disaster in so many ways, and we don't have to get into it, but like, and yes, oh my God, did they pay him handsomely? But it was kind of a big deal that Evan Fournier wanted to come here, even though they gave him all that money. And my God, was it a lot of money? And it was a big deal at the time that Kemba wanted to come here. Again, it wasn't the bloom was off the rose, but like there was enough there that like, okay, I want to come back to my hometown team, and I think your point is well taken that the perception has slowly changed over time. That's all.
Exactly. And now the Knicks don't necessarily need to rely on free agent acquisitions. It's something that they might do, but based on where their cap and all these things are, they did the free agent part for the most part. It's really now finding the right stars, the right players, and adding them likely through the draft or through trade. So let's look at the patterns, right? We talked about efficiency. Finishing is a huge part of this. Half court offense is also gigantic. Transition's important. And outside shooting, really for guards and forwards. That's kind of what they've shown. Maybe that changes. I don't know, but that's essentially where we're at. So I wanted to look at a few players, how they stacked up, and then where they fit in with these categories and go from there. And these are showing the players before this past season. So everything leading up to this season. So the first is Jalen Brunson. These numbers are courtesy of Cleaning the Glass. He was efficient.
I need to put on my Oakleys here for this. Ready for this?
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah.
It's good luck, right?
Yeah. Love it. Love it.
This is
he was
good
efficient
numbers.
for 3 of his 4 years in Dallas. He was great at the rim. His half court, I mean, he was overall pretty good. I'd say he was even better this past season, but we're not counting that right now. Transition, it was pretty good overall. His most recent season in Dallas, 85th percentile in transition. So that's important. Like you want to see this. You don't want to see a lot of blues. You want to see mostly orange when it comes to cleaning the glass. And there's certainly some blue here for a younger player, but a lot of orange to work with. Love it. Josh Hart. I mean, outside of one area, it's a sea of orange, right? This is someone who has always been efficient, has always done a really great job of finishing at the rim. In his, half court season, phenomenal. Like he's phenomenal in the half court outside of the 2 of the first 3 years of his career, I would say. And transition, just he's always been good at. For context, he's had only one time where he's appeared in 57th percentile on transition. Everything else has been like the season before last, 96th percentile. I mean, it's just, we've seen it. We know how good he can be.
We know he could
going downhill, going left to right. Credit to Benji. Right to left.
Whatever.
Whatever it is. It's
whatever it is. He's very good at it. Miami scouted it well in the playoffs, but he'll go and practice that in the offseason. I'm sure he'll come back better than ever.
Right. And again, the outside shooting is still important. Doesn't take a ton of threes. That's something to consider. But that was also, I feel like, as Portland said, stop shooting threes, and the Knicks are encouraging him to do that more, which is the right call. Isaiah Hartenstein, the smaller sample size because the first times he was in the league, it just kind of cups of coffee wherever he went. But the year before last, 82nd percentile in efficient field goal percentage. This is among bigs, mind you. 70th percentile at the rim. 80th percentile in the half court. 95th percentile in transition. You can see where the Knicks were going.
Yep.
So let's look at where they tried to go and didn't. Donovan Mitchell. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell, generally pretty efficient, right? Generally pretty efficient. Very good at the rim his last season in Utah. But before that, was okay. Wasn't the best. Obviously, generally very good in the half court. I mean, really good in the half court. Most recent season, Utah was 88th percentile. And in transition, he's a beast. We're talking someone who rookie year, 92nd percentile, 68th percentile, 58th percentile, and then 75th and 83rd percentiles to round it out. So those are important. And then the last player I'm going to show you as a target is OG Anunoby, right? Where OG was generally pretty efficient. Last year, I don't think he was quite as efficient, though. But
yeah, that whole team wasn't very efficient last year.
It was rough for them. Typically very good at the rim. Really good half-court player outside of his second season in the NBA. And in transition, outside of his second season and the season before last, he was good to very good. Probably just, above average overall, so to speak. But this kind of is how everything we've talked about is how I want to frame the conversation moving forward in terms of what we're doing next. Because, so as a recap, we're talking about archetypes. We're talking about shooting. We're talking about efficiency, how they perform in the half court, how they do in transition. Defense is going to be more of a general topic. It's harder to quantify in the way we can do with offense.
I would agree with that.
So it's hard to pick and choose exactly when it comes to the defensive part, which is important, but again, harder to parse out.
And we've also, I think, seen throughout their acquisitions since this regime has been in place that with the defensive end, I think they take more of an attitude towards we'll figure that part out later, as they know, like, that's where the defensive archetype at center comes in so prominently is that like they know, okay, all else fails, we're going to have someone back there who's going to be able to protect the rim, and we are going to run a scheme that makes sure, and like, you know, what people will vehemently disagree with this next statement, but like that's why you hire Tom Thibodeau. They'll disagree because they saw the season ranked whatever they ranked in defense. They were I think 19th or 20th or whatever the hell it was. I think we saw certainly the Cavs series, and we saw at times the Miami series, like when push comes to shove, they will be able to defend. It's about getting the players in here who are going to make their offense something that needs to be reckoned with, and they'll figure out the rest later.
Agreed.